Over the weekend, it was announced that Congressman John Lewis, who had announced late last year that he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer at that point, had tragically passed away. He was a son of sharecroppers and an apostle of nonviolence who was bloodied at Selma and across the Jim Crow South in the historic struggle for racial equality, and who then carried a mantle of moral authority into Congress. He was 80 when he died, and by the way, such a weird thing, he died on the same day as another civil rights stalwart, the Reverend C.T. Vivian, a close associate of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That sort of thing, I know it is a coincidence, but that sort of thing always gets me. Like that over these long careers in similar sort of work, that it would end on the same day. That always gets me. So we have more on his history, but how did you feel when you saw that news over the weekend, Francesca?
I mean, honestly, sad that he wasn't able to live to see us boot a white nationalist out of the White House summarily. I truly wanted to give some of these civil rights leaders who've been carrying this torch for so long that pleasure. But also really happy knowing that up until the very end, John Lewis saw what was going on in response to the George Floyd murder and gave his blessing and was so inspired by the young people who are taking the streets and really carrying his legacy on. And really that legacy is about getting arrested often and with vigor.
Yeah.
And that's what, he calls good trouble. And I think that a lot of people, we think that being arrested is bad. We have a negative association with it. Nah, it's actually part of a long tradition of nonviolent civil disobedience. And so I am happy that he at least was able to see that resurgence of this new civil rights movement.
Exactly. And there's a video I want to show of John Lewis that just seems so timely, considering sort of how he got his start in the national spotlight at the very least, and sort of what was going on politically and socially in the last months of his life. So I want everyone to take a look at this video. It's being featured in the upcoming, it might actually be released, the documentary about his life. This is from the 1963 March on Washington. Here is John Lewis.
Let us not forget that we are involved in a serious social revolution where is a political party that will make it unnecessary to march on Washington? Where is a political party that will make it unnecessary to march in the streets of Birmingham? Those who have said be patient and wait, we must say that we cannot be patient. If we do not get meaningful legislation out of this Congress, we will march through the South, through the streets of Jackson, through the streets of Danville, through the streets of Cambridge, through the streets of Birmingham. But we will march with the spirit of love and with the spirit of dignity that we have shown here today. We must say, wake up, America, wake up, for we cannot stop, and we will not and cannot be patient.
So, I mean, that's great, obviously, and I hope that same sort of spirit drives the movement of today. I was reading about that speech, and apparently, I don't remember the exact quote, but his first draft was different. It was more aggressive, and he and the Reverend worked it over to fix it a little bit from Martin Luther King Jr.'s perspective. But originally, he said, we're going to march like Sherman across the South, which is obviously a more, that's a more aggressive image.
Yeah.
But he saw it as necessary. And so is it any wonder that he was very supportive of the social movement that we see up until and including today, still in a number of cities across the country?
That's really interesting. I mean, I feel like even then, even now, but then in the 60s, coddling the South and specifically former Confederates and sympathizers, still annoyed that they lost. So it's like, how long are we going to keep coddling that kind of racism? And when can we say that it was wrong? That doesn't mean your ancestors are all trash, but it means that you can do better. I'm specifically speaking to like white people in the South. And like, it is, we literally cannot bear to coddle that kind of racism anymore in this country because people are dying. We cannot bear to uphold a racist police system that's killing Black people and people of color.
Exactly. And you've alluded to some of his history, but I want to read a little bit from some of the write-ups that I've read over the past few days. And a lot of this people have been saying in the comments. He was among the original 13 Freedom Riders, the black and white activists who challenged segregated interstate travel in the South in 1961. He was a founder and early leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which coordinated lunch counter sit-ins. He helped organize the March on Washington, where Dr. King was the main speaker on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Mr. Lewis led demonstrations against racially segregated restrooms, hotels, restaurants, public parks, and swimming pools, and he rose up against other indignities of second-class citizenship. At nearly every turn, he was beaten, spat upon, or burned with cigarettes. He was tormented by white mobs and absorbed body blows from law enforcement. He was arrested 40 times between 1960 and 1966. He was repeatedly beaten senseless by Southern policemen and freelance hoodlums. And I read about on the Pettus Bridge, the attack there, the footage of which was obviously very important in getting legislation passed. They talked about the cops and some of their like vigilantes basically taking like lengths of rubber and wrapping it in barbed wire and beating people with that. It's just crazy. And it reminds me, we had not too long ago, we had a guest on to talk about the petition to rename the bridge after John Lewis. And one of our producers reminded me that when we were talking, I think it was Michael Starr Hopkins, I think it was, said, let's do something that we all too rarely do. Let's not wait until after someone passes to acknowledge them in this sort of way. And then it's like this happens and it hits you. I hope that it happens. But yeah, it is unfortunate. Not that he, of course, he knew that he was very well respected and admired and all of that, but it would have been nice to see that as well, considering where he started. Absolutely.
Let's celebrate a lot of 75th birthdays. So we can get some of these civil rights leaders before they pass. But I also think that, it's okay if you don't really know who John Lewis is and you're just Googling and reading now. I think that's isn't that great? That his legacy can live on and that we keep him alive and you can tell your children and your children's children, we shouldn't have shame in not knowing the depths of a person's history, and no shame in learning now. I think that's totally fine. We shouldn't feel like we're jumping on any kind of bandwagon. Hey, I'm sure his book is sold out and people are going to watch this documentary. I think that's good. I also want to say, I know, there are some Bernie Sanders supporters who got all upset because John Lewis apparently said that he hadn't seen, I believe it was John Lewis who said he hadn't seen Bernie at a civil rights demonstration. Let that go. Just let it go. It all feels very petty right now when you consider the amount and the breadth of John Lewis's legacy to now hold him in 2020 or 2016 or whatever to these other standards. Just don't be petty about it. All right. This is why I think the left has trouble building bipartisan and multi-tendency coalitions, is because we're so, orthodox about these things. Yeah. It's okay. So we wanted Hillary Clinton to win. That's okay. Let it go.
Yeah. And when we acknowledge people like this, we are not saying, let's talk now for 15 minutes about John Lewis, because I agree with everything that he ever did and everything that he ever stood for. That's not what it is. Some of his politics we obviously disagree with in terms of endorsements and other things. If it was us, we would have done parts of it differently. But the reason we're acknowledging it is because if it was me, some of the parts that I probably would have regrettably done differently are the most amazing things about him. The bravery that he had, I wouldn't have had. I wouldn't have been able to do that. I would say that few would have. That is why we admire these people from that time so much. Doesn't mean that we agree with literally everything, but I don't want to be a part of the internet movement where we get you to like us by just taking every person and poisoning them and poisoning you against them, and just, you know what, you can't trust literally anyone. I'm the only one you can trust. Screw all of these. I don't want to be a part of that.
Because what if Monster Drink Company starts donating to the Trump administration? Then we have to cancel John. And where would we be without the damage report?
Exactly. Well, we'd watch the Bitch
Just think about it.
So we'd be okay. But, and to that end, I want to end with, there's a million different testimonials about him that could be given. I had one of AOC's. But anyway, I just want to read one from before. It's not in response to him dying. This is from back in 2011 when he was being presented the Presidential Medal of Freedom by Barack Obama, who said, "Generations from now, when parents teach their children what is meant by courage, the story of John Lewis will come to mind. An American who knew that change could not wait for some other person or some other time, whose life is a lesson in the fierce urgency of now." And again, I disagree with Barack Obama on a lot of different things, but that is 100% true. And that is why I'm so glad that people are acknowledging this amazing life's work that he had. It should be an inspiration. You don't have to be inspired by literally all of it, but it should be an inspiration to be a little bit braver, a little bit more urgent in pushing for your values and trying to make the country reflective of what you think it needs to be.
I just want to add one last thing, which is I do think that let's remember why he took a beating so many times and why that Sunday was called Bloody Sunday. It was for voting rights. And every time we try to say that voting doesn't matter, that voting is unimportant, let's remember that John Lewis took a bat to the head so that all Americans could vote, and particularly, you know, the most oppressed Americans, Black Americans, you know, grandchildren of former slaves, right? Like that is significant. And so let's remember that every time we're trying to discredit and discount voting and what that means. That also means we have to protect the right to vote and, you know, end voter suppression, et cetera. But let's not be facile with how important voting is.
Yeah. Yeah, how many of us could have had the freedom, the bravery to be a freedom rider, to board a bus knowing when you get off, maybe best case scenario you get beaten, but maybe far worse. Maybe you disappear. Maybe you get dragged into the woods by the KKK or something like that. Yeah, it's amazing.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.